but this is the only way we can preserve what we want to do. I have divided my little ideas on three parts. The first part is a tribute to my parents. And the thing that I remember most, that I'm sure that most of you don't remember, is how hard the folks worked when they were younger. You can't imagine what it was like milking 20 cows morning and evening by hand, day in and day out, year in and year out. Many a time I come home on Sunday evening, I think, I'm so glad we don't have chores to do. Now, I guess it wasn't as long as it seemed to me, because we moved to the Freeze Farm when I was 4 years old, and we lived there until I was in 6th grade, and I was about 12 then. So that's just 8 years, but it's the biggest single block of my childhood that I can remember. They were always doing chores, but they were still doing chores when they moved to Locke in 1952. So that means they did chores from 1924 to 1923 to 1952. You can figure out how many years that is. To say nothing of how tough times were. I would have been 5 years old when the Depression started, but I don't remember that my folks talking about it at all. But all I can remember is that my dad used to say, before times were so tough, we used to do so and so. I didn't know what that meant, but then besides milking all those cows, you had to haul milk to town yet on a truck. How many of you remember the truck that my dad used to have? Edward and Marvin will remember. Lester, you remember? Yeah, I figured you would, because Lester used to like to go along to the milk can stop. Did we have more than one truck, or was it just one truck that you had all those? Truck. Just one truck all those years. Things lasted a long time during the Depression, I'll tell you. I don't want to bore you with the thoughts about the Depression, because those of you who don't remember it think, well, it couldn't have been all that bad. Everybody survived. But when you were in the middle of it, you didn't know how you were going to survive. What if you'd had the size families a lot of people did? And nobody knew that things were going to get any better. They went on quite a long time that way. The other thing I would like to say is that I really appreciate about my parents is that they always took such good care of everything. Things just lasted and lasted and lasted, and they would have lasted a lot longer if we kids hadn't destroyed the stuff for them, which we played with. But they never had much money, but they took good care of everything, and everything lasted a long time. Then last, I think, the biggest gift that they gave to us was to give us a great deal of freedom considering their situation. I think they didn't have much money, and they didn't do much to encourage us to tell us what they thought we ought to do. But as far as ideas were concerned, the sky was the limit. They never stopped us from reading anything we wanted to read. We could have, and we bought things and had things and did things that I'm sure most of our contemporaries didn't do. In fact, when the folks were thinking about buying their own farm, they considered buying Grandpa Schmucker's farm, which was right in the heart of the Amish settlement. And I used to lay awake at night and cry for fear that they were going to do this, because I knew what that would mean. Because where we lived on the edge of the Amish community, we had non-Amish friends and teachers and neighbors, and they were our window to the outside world, and as I think of it today anyway. I guess that's all I'm going to say about that. There's no doubt in my mind that the fact that the folks bought the farm where they did instead of Grandpa Schmucker's farm had a definite bearing on the direction of our family life. I'm sure that that's true. And I just want to say a couple things, especially about Dad. Nothing ever wore out for Dad. He never threw anything away. When he got a new hat, he kept his old one because he might need it sometime. Well, got a new pair of shoes, he'd always save the old ones because these were still wearable. To this day, if Mom wouldn't have thrown them away, they'd probably still all be around. There wouldn't be nothing but standing room only. That has an advantage as well as a disadvantage, as you can see. Those of you who know. Another thing that I remember my dad used to say, he'd say, "Schick dich shadow, was du noch dran?" Those of you, that means behave yourself while you still can, or while you still know how. And another thing one of the early things that I remember about him is that he used to play the autoharp. I thought that was the most beautiful music I ever heard. Some of you younger ones, it was wrecked by the time you came along. Too bad for you. And I remember he used to whistle. I don't remember that I ever heard him sing. I used to hear Mom sing a lot, but I never heard my dad sing, not by himself. Another thing that he used to say was, you'll be a fool or your own doctor by the time you're 40. And that has turned out to be quite true. I don't know if any of you remember hearing him say that or not, but just recently a lady went to the doctor and she came home, she didn't have any medicines and no prescription. So this is a new wrinkle. You go to the doctor and you don't get any medicine. And that one of the new ideas is people learning to help take care of their own health and learning to know what they can do and what they can't do. The same lady told the doctor that she thought her husband had an ulcer. Would he please give her an ulcer diet? And the doctor said, tell him if it hurts, don't eat it. That was so Dad was right. I think he's still pretty good about avoiding the doctors as much as he can. And then about Mom, I would like to say that I especially appreciated what a good housekeeper she was. I can't believe when I think how orderly her house always was. There was only one drawer in the house. Every shelf, every cupboard, every drawer was in order, except one drawer in the buffet where we used to throw the pencils and the paper and whatever didn't have room anyplace else would go in that drawer. That was sort of, but everything else had a place. Now I always think that if I had had the time, maybe I could keep house like her. I don't know if I would have or not, but I appreciate that because I think an orderly house contributes to an orderly life, and that's as I remember it. I realize, of course, that it was easier when you don't have as much stuff to keep house with. Each kid doesn't have as many toys, not as many clothes, not as much room. Not every kid has their own room and their own toys and their own everything. Another thing, who do you know that could fry 10 eggs in a skillet at one time and all the whites were done and all the yolks were soft and not broke a single one because there were 8 kids sitting around the table yelling that they didn't want their egg yolks broken. And I think my mother was a good shopper. She knew she knew the difference between material that was dyed before it was woven and that was dyed after it was woven. She knew about the thread count in sheets. When she went to buy sheets, she knew what to look for. I remember talking about a certain weight of denim that she used to buy for the boys, that she made clothes for the boys. Another thing she used to say is don't clutter up your house with third one purpose. So whenever Pete thinks we should get an onion chopper, I always think about that. I think I don't need an onion chopper because I can chop onions without an onion chopper. Another thing she used to say, and I'm sure this is not original with her, and I used to just hate to hear her say it, but I'm going to say it anyway. She said, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. that meant saying that it's not just what you intend to do, but it's what you do that counts. Another thing that I remember when I went to grade school, some family moved out from the edge of town, and so they came to the cult school, and it was rumored around that their father was a drunkard, and this was something completely new to most of us. And so I was telling my mother about this lady or this person who was a drunkard, and my mother said, "Now, you don't hold that against the children because they have nothing to do with what the parents do. You can't." And I think that made a very big impression on me. And one of the girls in that family became one of my best friends, and I think it has stuck by me since that time. Another thing that she said one time, this was when the folks were farming 50-50. I don't know if I have to explain what that means or not, but they had to buy half interest of the cattle and the implements, I think, on the Freeze farm. So the way they paid this was it would be taken out of the milk check. So I couldn't understand why we had to be, poor as we were, why we had to be paying money to the rich Freezes who owned our farm. And my mother said, well, now, whatever you owe to other people, you have to pay. It makes no difference how much they have or how little we have. When we have a debt, we have to pay it. And I think it was never said in so many words, but it was expected that we should make something of ourselves. It was never really spelled out exactly. I want to backtrack just for one thing. I had an idea here that I forgot. Talking about my parents giving us a lot of freedom. When I was about in the 3rd grade, I think, it was up to Elkhart to see a movie about the life of Abraham Lincoln. So I came home and told Dad that we were supposed to bring a quarter to school. I don't remember if I told him what it was for or not, but I'm not sure. But anyhow, he coughed up a quarter and gave it to me, and so I went to this movie, which made a lasting impression on me too. It was something I'd never seen before, and something that I was pretty sure my folks weren't planning to take us to. And so, and I remember asking my mother who took those pictures of the Civil War, and she said, well, they reenacted all this. So I couldn't believe it. So Mom kind of knew what the movies were about. Then I have another section about each one of my brothers and sisters, but I think I'll pass for now. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm afraid I think I'll just pass. I'm going to take more than my share of time if I keep on.
Well, I think some of the earliest things that I remember was living on the farm, on the Freeze farm, and I think that's what I like to do most. Was go along and Dad went in to haul milk to the creamery. That was a city of wonder to me. I just couldn't believe, and I practically got lost in that place a couple of times, but what kind of an operation, when I look back to see what kind of an operation they used to have there when the Frieses had that whole building there. They had the processing chickens, and they had eggs, and they had dried eggs, they had dried milk, they had, I made cheese, ice cream mix, ice cream, butter, and they did the whole routine. Now, I remember I thought that was really something. And I think I remember once in a while we'd get some of the things that were a little bit tainted, I think, that we used to bring home. Either we'd feed it to the hogs, or once in a while we'd get a little bit of it. I think we ate a little bit of it ourselves, that I remember. And like you say, I remember too. We used to do a lot of chores. That was quite a big project. And then of course the school. That's what I remember next. Walking to Culp School over there, and I thought that was. But I remember we were talking about some of the times then, what the weather we used to have in the wintertime, that we'd walk right across the fields to school, right across the top. The snow was clear up to the fence. We'd walk, the snow would melt a little bit on top, we'd walk right across the fences, right across the fields to school. Didn't have to go around the road because, it was much closer that way. And, there were a lot of funny things that happened at school too. I think Marvin remembers too, about one time at recess time, or it was at noontime, when he got his banana out, peeled his banana, and opened the furnace door, and thought he threw the peeling. Instead of that, he threw the banana in there, he stood with the peeling in his hand. And nobody knew anything about it until on the way home from school that evening, and I remember Mary and us kids laughed from the end of the lane we got clear to the house. And but I remember some of the Frieses, Carl Fries. I remember him coming out there. I don't remember whether his wife come out there very, very much with him or not, but I remember this big car that he used to have. I used to adore that big car he used to drive out there. Had the big spare tire on the running board on the front, It was quite a car he used to bring out there and come out there to see how things were, I guess. But I think as I remember, a lot of times at least I think I remember him giving me a nickel or a dime or a quarter or something like that once in a while when he came out there. And some of the funny things that I guess that happened around the farm there when we lived on the Fries farm is that I remember pretty well that we used to have some hired men around there, and also that one of them, or maybe I guess it was just one that used to make a little bit of home brew, or someone was responsible for a little bit of that. And I remember when the folks were gone one time on a Sunday, and Sunday evening they had some of the young people came, and I think Valentine was the hired man at that time, and they opened up a couple of bottles of this home brew, and they were having a little schpass around there, and I was kind of watching this whole thing, and I don't know how it came about, but anyway, I was offered a little bit of this, and I got a pretty good slug of it, and I was riding my tricycle around the yard, and everything was going fine, so, a couple times around the yard, and then I run into a tree, and I was like, I figured that home brew was starting to take effect. That was my first introduction to some of the stuff that came out of the basement, That pretty good. We sampled a number of that. I think some of the other boys remember that we used to sample some of that wild grape stuff that was in the basement. That was bright, smart, good. And then we, of course, from there when we moved over to the farm over there, and of course, changing schools. That was, well, I might say a little bit about some of the teachers we had at Stricker School, just for a little bit. That I guess I would remember the teachers that I felt I learned a lot from, and then the teachers that we had a good time when we were there. And one of them I would have to say that was Mrs. Christner. That I felt that I learned the most from. She was a very good teacher, and I felt I learned a lot that year. And but I think the time that I learned the least was when Mrs. Shirk was there. We always had instead of a 15-minute recess, we always had a half hour, and sometimes the noon hours were an hour and a half instead of an hour. You know. And we enjoyed that, of course, you know, but we didn't learn very much that way. But anyway, we passed, so that was just me. So, and I remember, you remember all the Hampshire children that were in school there. I think one of the incidents that I remember that, and I guess we never got stuff like that. We never got candy bars and stuff like that. And with his folks having a store, well, he came to school with all kinds of candy bars and stuff. And so if I would have had a nickel or a dime or something like that, I could have bought maybe a couple of candy bars or something from it. Because he'd a lot of times bring a few of them and he'd sell them to, you know, and he didn't have the money to buy something else. He wanted to buy maybe, well, I would imagine probably it would be cigarettes or something like that, as I remember. But anyway, he was a sort of a bully, as I remember, and he was about the same grade I was. And we got talking about it, somebody offered me a nickel. And of course I thought, boy, a nickel, I could buy an ice cream cone or something like that if I go up and hit him in the mouth. And I never did much fighting. I did a lot of running. I never did a lot of fighting. I popped him in the mouth, and I got the nickel. So that's the only time I remember doing something like that. I felt bad about it afterwards, but at the time that nickel looked pretty good. I thought that, but I don't think I enjoyed the nickel. What I did with it afterwards, I'm not sure. But anyway, and then we, of course, went to the other farm, and that was quite a switch with moving over to the other farm. We had that meant a lot. I think that meant a lot more work for us kids that were at home. I think we had more because we had Dad had a lot of fixing up to do at that farm, and paying for the farm, and I think it was talked about, and we knew how much Dad had paid for that farm. At that time, that was quite a bit, $4,800. Wow, that was a lot of money. And I remember he went over and worked on the railroad by the day, and so we made some kind of an attempt to help with doing some of the farming, at least partially, and sometimes we didn't get it done, but anyway, and some of the things that I remember, I don't remember exactly whether it's something that I did or whether it's something I didn't do, but anyway, I remember that there was a reminder every step I took from the house to the barn. Dad was right back of me, and every step I took, boom, boom, boom. And it did kind of remind me of what I was supposed to do and didn't get done. And so, it kind of hurt my pride, but I guess it was good for me, really. We didn't, and us children never got punished like we heard that some of our neighbors' children got punished, if you can recall. And I appreciate about our family. I think, after being on the farm for a while, I got a good experience of what the farm was all about, and then we got a thrash machine and all that. That was quite a enjoyable thing, too. going thrashing. I thought, boy, we were big shots, you know, when we were on that thrashing rig, you know. We could do all the collecting, you know. All the money had come into us now instead of us paying out money for having to go thrashing, you know. So, and then as I remember, my first job when I left home to go get a job in town, I remember getting a working permit and worked for the Cox Lumber Company. That was my first job, and then several other jobs on down the way. The milling company some time, and then I remember during the war I worked at the milling company. I still can't believe that I did this. I'd go to work at the milling company for when they were making flour for the government. I'd go to work in the 6 o'clock in the evening and work till 6 o'clock in the morning, and handling bags of flour, 115 pounds a bag, and 115 pounds per bag, and I used to lift those up over my head, you know. And those we used to stack in the big box cars, and that's I remember doing that for at least 1 or 2 summers. I guess I remember doing that. And I guess from then I went to Fletcher's Furniture, worked for them for some time, and then I went to the bakery and had a bad accident with the bakery going over to South Bend early one morning. A milk truck coming out from a side road, never stopping, and I ran into the side of him, and then I guess I was off for a week or 2 from that, and then I started back working for the bakery again for Mr. Genshorn, grocery truck, and it was a different kind of a truck altogether. And the first time we had that truck out, we came home and we were on a narrow road. I forget which road we were on. We were on some narrow road, and I run the back wheels off the edge of the road, and that thing dropped in the ditch. Not a deep ditch, but enough to almost upset us. And so I kind of took the hint from that I shouldn't be driving a grocery truck. So I went from there to the Schmucker Lumber Company. I worked there for a while, and as a result, that's what happened at Schmucker Lumber Company. I would say it was partly their fault. It was partly my fault. It was about 50-50. Anyway, they paid all the expenses when this accident happened, and it should have gone to the State Industrial Board. If it would have been, I understand that it would have gone in there if it would have been all their fault, but it was partly my fault. It was not completely in the line of work at my particular job, so it was never sent to the State Industrial Board, and I never got a settlement for this. You know, I probably could have if I would have pressed it, but I felt that I was off for about 3 months with my finger, and then I felt I learned a lesson through that when I was off work because of my hand. I did a lot of reading. I went to the library. I think that's one place where I started appreciating classical music, because I went to the library and I listened to either got some records or listened to some records there. I don't remember how it was, but I learned to appreciate classical music through the accident that I had with my hand. And from there I went to Elkhart to work for the Elkhart Cleaners, and from then, I've had several jobs since then. But anyways, I remember some of the things that when I started working my first job away from home, and riding my bicycle to town, and I couldn't understand why I had to give up some of my money to the folks. But the older I get now, I guess I can appreciate that now that that they're financially independent, and we don't have to help them like some of the people that we know that their children have all gone on their own, and have never helped their parents. And I think I don't regret that we did this. I think it was a good learning experience. At least it was. I felt it was for me. And I think I some of the things I remember about my parents. Like you say, like Mary said, they gave us a lot of freedom. There weren't a lot of do's and don'ts, but I think that I remember Mother always saying that it's not that we won't allow you to do these type of things, but the end results might be this, and I think we had to, at least in my case, I had to find out some of the things by myself, and I've always appreciated some of the godly things that came from my parents, and as I get older, I appreciate them more respect, more love for them, and these are some of the things that I remember.
One of the indications, I guess, that we're getting old is when we start looking back and appreciating and reminiscing all the things that happened. And I think I've already heard someone say this evening that so often, at the time when things are happening, we almost suppress them, wishing they weren't happening. We try to forget them. And maybe for some of us who grew up a little different from most of our friends, that's even more true. We try, for some reason or other, to suppress some of the experiences we've had, looking forward to the time when we can be more like everybody else we think. So that isn't really always true. As I recall my experiences with my parents and the family that I grew up in, it is with a great deal of appreciation that I have been able to be used of the Lord the way I have. And I'm sure there's a reason for that. And I would like to give credit to Mom for that. Being the third in the family, when I was growing up, Mary and Ed were both baptized in the Amish church. And it was my observation that they hadn't appreciated having done that at the time. The result was I was not in the church anywhere. Although I attended now and then the North Main Street Church or wherever, but I wasn't going anyplace regularly at all. And occasionally Mother would talk to me about being baptized and the fact that I was already 17 or 18 years old. And I would sort of put her off. Finally one day Mother said, "Why don't you find a church that you like and go there?" And that was like a conversion experience for me, to hear her say that. To believe that she would be happy if I went to a church, and I found a church and that I liked and went. And that was an important experience in my life. There were other people who made indelible impressions on me as a youngster. The one person I would like to mention who made a rather vast impression, not necessarily a good one, but an impression no less, and that was Roy Phelps. When he came to our house, I didn't know how to speak English. And I guess I had 1,000 questions to ask him. What do you call this? And what do you call that? I knew that much. And I must have been about 4 years old at that time. I can just barely remember it. And he helped me a lot. But I discovered a few days, maybe it was a week, maybe it was a month later, that he taught me a whole lot of words that Mother didn't like. However, one day Mother took me aside and she said, "No, there are some of those words that we just don't use at our house." And she talked to me right plain to my face. And I was pretty sure I knew which one the words were. And it took some thought on my part and on the rest of us, I'm sure, to realize and to understand what was happening. But Roy Phelps was a special kind of person to all of us, I'm sure. Not that he was necessarily a good influence on us, but he was another one of those persons who gave us windows on the outside world, from a rather sheltered world in which we grew up in. The other thing that I thought was rather significant in our lives was the friends that I had. I'm not sure about the rest of you. For some reason, I had very few or hardly any Amish friends. The good friends I have were the bad kids in school, like Junior Hampshire and some of those guys. They were just rotten, but they were good friends. You can depend on them to stick with you if you got in a fight or whatever. The experience of attending the Amish church was always interesting to me. The Amish church had some good preachers and also some bad ones. And I couldn't tell the difference as a youngster. The bench was just as hard when I was listening to a good one, especially when I was very young. I appreciated when the cookies and the crackers came around. But it wasn't long until I was too big for that. And that sort of spoiled things for me. Well, some of the firsts in my life were, I guess the first funeral that I actually remember was the funeral of Dad's sisters, Nora and Katie, when they were killed. I can just barely remember that, but I know there was a funeral. And I don't know where it was. I couldn't remember the place. It seemed like the place where the funeral was held was in a long lane. And also, a strange thing happened. I think we were in church one Sunday morning, and two people stood up and got married. It was in a regular Sunday morning service. And two people got married. And that's the first wedding that I remember. I can't recall very specifically my first day in school, but I do remember that Ed Bach was the teacher. It was real unusual for us to have a man teacher. Also, I remember that I didn't do very good work for him. And I'm not sure why. Motivate me very well. Another thing I remember that happened, got a good laugh out of all the other pupils in school, was that after our recitation in the morning, the teacher would write our name on the blackboard, and we were to go to the blackboard, us first graders, and write underneath our name, repeatedly our name again. Try to copy his writing. And my name was always easy to find because it was the only one that started with an M. One day, of course, he never put the names in the same place, but we had to find our name. One day, I went to the wrong place. And lo and behold, there was a new girl in class, and her name was Margaret. And I tried to write her name. And the whole school just laughed and roared. And I couldn't figure out what was going on until I backed up and I looked over to the other side and I saw that I was in the wrong place. Well, Edward talked about our farming. And I think there was a year or so that Ed and I did the bulk of the farming that got done. I remember we worked hard all day, and we had no fun at all, I guess. After supper, we decided we're going to have some fun. We jumped on our bikes and rode around the block, a mile block around, just riding our bikes just to have some fun, I guess. So it indicates that we weren't very tired, I guess, but we needed to have some fun. And I don't know if Ed ever got a nickel for hitting me or not, but if he did, he must have a lot of them. For a long time, I had a secret ambition of getting bigger than Ed. But I have since given that up. I think that's as much as I would like to.
To begin with, I think of the first things that I can remember that came to my mind when I started thinking about my past. And the youngest, and I don't know how old I was, I used to sit on a rocking chair and put my feet out behind the rocking chair. There was a back part was partially open. I could stick my legs down in the back of that rocking chair, and I'd sit there and rock. And I think I would fall asleep there a lot of times during the day. Now that was on the farm, on the Freeze farm. That's one of my earliest things that I can remember about the Freeze farm. And I don't remember going to church so much, but I do remember that we had church at our house, and that was always exciting. I always thought that was the most fun. Get all the furniture out of the house and put these benches in there. The night before, you know, we already had the benches all set ready for church, you know. And I thought that was just great. I was always set. That was really fun. Talking about people working for us, the first person I can remember is Roy Phelps, but also Kate Schmucker worked for us. Didn't he used to tease her an awful lot? Oh, I remember that so vividly. And I don't know if he used to tease me too or what, but I remember sitting on the, getting mad one time or something, or pouting, and I guess I must have done a lot of that in my day. Get mad and pout and stomp and kick and scream, and that's not too pleasant to remember, but I know I did. And I sat on the side of his little, he had an old Model T or something, had a running board. I sat on the side of it away from the house so that nobody could see me, and I was sitting there pouting, I guess. He went out, he had a shocking machine in that car. He turned on that shocking machine, and ever since, I hate being shocked. There is nothing that I can think of that I hate worse than being shocked. And I think it points back to that time, probably, from that memory. Because, oh, I hated that. Going to school, I don't remember my first day or anything. I remember I really liked school. The first teacher I can recall, it was probably, what was her name? One of you mentioned her. Not Fern Geyer, but the one before her, Miss Shirk. Yeah. Now, I don't remember her, except that we used to call her Mud Fence. Remember that? So evidently she wasn't too well liked, but she was really lenient with us. And evidently, an old maid, yes. And evidently I didn't learn too well from her, because I remember that when we got Fern Geyer, I was about in the 3rd grade, and she had to personally work with me, and she really took a lot of patience with me to help me to read, learn to read better so that I could stay in the 3rd grade, or I would have had to, in fact, maybe it was I was supposed to be in the 4th and I was reading with the 3rd grade or something like that. She really took a lot of trouble working with me. That I remember. From then on, from that year on, I don't remember ever having any trouble in school that much. But I do remember that I had, she really sticks out in my mind. She really was a good teacher. Some of the things I don't remember a whole lot about living on the farm, except till we moved over on the place over where we lived and went to the other school. I remember that we'd done a lot of work on the house, repaired and that kind of thing. I remember that very well. Remember that we used to walk to school all the way every day. Hardly ever. Once in a while, Dad would hitch up the horse and buggy and take us to school when it was really cold. But sometimes we walked all the way and then there was no school. We got there and the schoolhouse was closed up and no heat, hardly, and we'd have to turn around and go back home, about froze. So those are some of the things that I remember. But I do remember some of the friends that we had, like some of the rest of you said. Maybe it was a window. I never thought about it like that, to the outside world, but one of my best friends that I can remember is Marilyn Burkholder. Now, she was a Christian, really. They went to the Union Center Church. And I used to go home with her quite a lot. Oh, another one, even earlier than that, was Bertha Schmucker. Now, I think she must have been from the Cope School yet. And here just recently, her brother that died? Christy Schmucker? And I would have so liked to have gone to the funeral home, but it was kind of sudden. I didn't really realize that he had died until it was almost over with already. He was buried, and I guess it was a very short time that he was at the funeral home. And so I would have loved to seen her, really, and talk to her again. It's been years since I've seen her. I think she lives in Fort Wayne, but she was a nice girl, and I used to go home with her a lot. I used to really like to go home with other girls. I don't know if all of us, the children, used to do that as much as I did or not, but that was really fun, to go home with somebody else and have them come home with you from school. That was really neat. And Marilyn Burkholder was another one that I used to be real good friends with, and I still see her once in a while in Elkhart. She lives in Elkhart, and I see her once in a while. And I have good memories about some of those kinds of things. And of course, the teacher then was Glenna Andrews, which wasn't Andrews then; it was Glenna Blosser. And the strange thing is that some of my own children had her for a teacher then too, as they came along. Some of my own children went back to her as a teacher. And another one was Mrs. Stump. They live in Nappanee here. Right? Leona Stump, yes. Yeah. And so I even went home with her one time, and I'm not sure why I went home with a teacher, but I did one time. I went home with her, and remembered that situation. Some of the things I remember about Mom and Dad both was that, and I think one of the things that probably means the most to me now when I look back was the fact that Mom used to go over to the Loch Brethren Christ Church when they had revival meetings. And we walked over there. And a lot of times, about every time they had revival meetings, we'd go over at least a couple evenings a week. And that's where I first really accepted Christ as my Savior. But of course, I was still too young and too immature to know what all involved by joining a church. But I wanted to go there. But of course, Mother explained that I was still underage, and I accepted that. I'm sure that was the case. I remember they preached really, they preached hell and hellfire. I mean, it was a different kind of preaching. You don't very often hear that anymore, that kind of preaching. They preached hellfire, in which I said you don't hear that very much anymore in the churches. Some preachers still do, but it was a different kind of preaching than we hear nowadays. But that was some of the things I remember. Oh my, what are some of the things I can remember? There's a lot of things I can remember, but I didn't write them down. I should have. That would help me to remember, keep remembering them. So maybe I should just pass on for now and let somebody else go ahead.
Well, I guess some of the earlier memories that I have of home, some of the earliest things, they're just vague and not really, maybe not always joined together. I remember, I think there were 4 of us slept in Mom and Dad's bedroom. 2 of us, or 2 or 3, slept out one end of the bed, and the other slept at the other end. We covered blanket, both, slept out of both ends of the bed. Big bed. I remember a very young age, we got a radio, which was very, something quite unusual. We got a big radio to put up on and I learned to yodel, with the radio. I remember that we used to bring these big tubs of cottage cheese. I guess it used to be byproducts of making butter, and feed it to the hogs. And it did taste pretty good, I guess. I don't remember we ate that much of it, though. I guess there wasn't that much of a market for it then. And one of my early dreams that were kind of scary, I guess, was there was, if I remember right, the woodshed and then the tool shed. And I used to dream about sitting on one of those seats in the tool shed. I don't know why. That was kind of a, I guess, kind of a scary dream that I had. And I remember that we had geese one time, and one of the geese got after me and really caught me. I don't remember who helped get away the geese then. I was scared of the geese after that. Let's see. I remember a little bit about the hired hand. I don't remember who it was. Seems to me like I went with him to either to South Bend or Chicago. And all I remember is that we went over a bridge, and there was a railroad below us, or up, I think there was another road up above. And that was really something really opened up my eyes. I always did like to go places. Also, one of the hired hands one time, I remember at it must have been the supper table, dinner table, they held,
Okay, starting with the mashed potatoes.
Well, as I said, I feel like it was Edward, but I don't remember for sure. I was quite small at the time. Also on this trip to Chicago, I think it was the first time I had cheese and crackers. We ate that on the way, and that was really unusual, I thought. Early days at school, one of the things that really somehow stood out, the first couple of days, I think, boys in the first grade wouldn't keep quiet, and he didn't want to sit in his seat. And if I remember right, well, the same kid, Christmas time when they gave a program, he couldn't sing, so he just mouthed the words. But he just opened his mouth, as wide as he could, and closed it, and didn't make any sense with the rest of the program. I remember sitting. I don't remember. Like it was this egg sandwich, scrambled egg sandwich or something. And I was sitting beside one of the big boys in school, and he bawled me out because he didn't like egg sandwich, and I sat him. I had a lot of nerve to sit beside him. And I guess, let's see. Thing I admired about Dad was, I guess, his creativity and as far as building. He did a lot of building, and I always admired that. I like to be out there, see him build up the shed or tool shed and chicken house, and I remember what all he built. And that was really quite, really inspired me. And I guess the Bible stories that Mom read to me made a big impression to me. I also, a couple of times, I guess, when they used plaster cast on my chest for something. I don't remember what kind of a condition I had, whether I had whooping cough or something. But I never got the mumps. I had to do the chores for the others, and I just wished I could get the mumps so I could rest. I know that I wore a lot of hand-me-downs, but I did have one new coat, a brown coat, and I was really proud of that. I used to enjoy visits to the cousins. That's, I think, one of the outstanding things. We used to visit quite often. I don't remember what her last name was. I know I got beaten up because I kissed one of the girls in school. Her name was Helen, I think.
Helen
Mattern, I think.
I thought it was Phyllis Hussar.
No, I don't think so. As I said, I remember enjoyed the cousins. I remember the Jonas Stutzmans. They used to have poems or something. They used to have about all the children, I think, or some kind of a joke about the different members of the family. I remember some of the other cousins, like the Levi Hoster. They used to have they'd have a raccoon pet. And I don't remember what all kind of animals they had. Of course, Grandpa was there too, Grandpa Schmucker, so I especially like to go there. Yes, I remember the thrashing machine. That was very enjoyable. I guess one of the memories going along down to the place where they ground feed, where they had these paper cups, which was quite unusual, and they'd use them once and throw them away. And I remember I used to get a bunch of them out of the wastebasket and bring them along home, and I thought that was so wonderful. They'd have the cups made out of paper, like a cone. I remember also the shocking milk can. I don't remember whether they shocked the cats that came to drink out of the milk pail or lid or what. I also remember taking eggs to the grocery store when we moved over to our own place. Eggs up to get some money and then buy groceries and come back home. I guess that's about some of the main memories that I have from home. One other memory that I have was when I fell off of the top of the barn. I had gone up to, I guess, to rob some sparrow nests, and I fell down on the hay was all out of the mow, I think, almost. And I fell down and I broke my arm. I remember they took me up to the doctor, and I thought they were going to pull my arm off. I really didn't understand what they were trying to do. And I think I slept in the crib then that night downstairs. But that was...
I think that's the
Right
only
now.
broken bone that was in our family when we were still at home.
About the first that I can remember of when I was young was this long row of stanchions over at the Freeze Farm. But I don't remember too much of living there. I mostly remember that we moved over to County Road 150, where we lived most of my life. And I remember so vividly how my brothers used to give me a rough time. I had 5 of them. But Eli, he was the worst one. Boy, we'd pull hair and bite. And once I remember I took a stick and I hit him on the back of the head and it really bled. But he was the worst one to tease me. And I also remember back how the money used to get from Dad's pocket into Mom's. You'd gripe and grumble how that it takes so much for feed and to keep the chickens laying eggs and to raise those chickens. They wanted to sell them for fryers, but that was the way Mom got her money. She'd raise chickens and sell eggs, and she'd also sell fryers. And then I remember from a very young age when we used to walk to school, and how deep the snow used to be, and we'd have to wear long underwear, to keep our legs warm, and the girls had to wear mudley. You know what them things were? A mudley?
Like a cape.
A little sort of a cape-like thing. It wasn't a coat, and we just hated to wear them. And but one nice thing about going to school was I remember one of the others said something about when you get to school will be cold. But as I remember, anyhow, when I started to school, Marvin stayed at Menno Kaufman's, and he used to build the fire at the school. So we know that when we got there, at least we could dry off and warm up before we had to go back home if there wasn't any school. And I remember one time we went to school, and there wasn't going to be any that day because it was too bad of weather. And we thought we'd really cheer up the place. So we put the chairs up on the tables, and Fannie Mae, she took chalk and she rolled around on the walls. I don't know if the teacher ever did find out who did it, but we thought it was really funny. And anyway, then I'm not sure. I guess it was in the 40s when Mom and Dad started going to Florida. And this one winter was when Fannie Mae and Marvin had gotten married, and we had to stay at home, of course, and so they were on the farm, and we stayed with them. And Marvin, he used to save pennies. And so, of course, Fannie Mae, she was pregnant about right away, and so she she didn't feel good so much of the time. And so Marvin, he'd say, he'd give me a handful of pennies if I'd wash the dishes for him. So I'd wash the supper dishes, and he'd give me a handful of pennies, and I thought that was really something. And then another thing that I remember back was when we were younger, we wouldn't wash the supper dishes. We'd just try to clean our dish out real good because we had to eat out of it the next morning. and so that just went on until we were old enough, the girls were old enough to wash dishes, and then we started washing the supper dishes in the evenings. But I think the reason for that was because with all the chores we had to do, we had got around so late to eat supper, and so we would just not wash the supper dishes. And then I remember, too, how this one family, and I think all of in our family, remember Walter Moist's family, how they used to bring a block of ice and a bag of sugar and let's make some ice cream. And so they usually had their bunch of dirty, ragged-looking children along, and we'd have to make ice cream. And another thing, too, that I remember, which had been repeated before, how that Dad always saved everything, and I think that kind of rubbed off on me, because it seems like I have trouble throwing things away. And then one of the things I remember about Mom, and which has also been said, how that she was a good housekeeper, and how she still tells me how. What should be done? But seems like it just doesn't work that way sometimes. And one of the things I remember about Mom too was how she used to hang out clothes in the dead of winter, and they'd freeze on the line, and she'd bring these boards in and we'd try to dry them off somehow inside the house. And I couldn't figure that out. Why she ever hung them out when they just froze anyhow. And I do remember too how that we used to separate the milk. We used to bring it in on the back porch and separate it, and then sell the cream. I guess that was when we lived over on the farm where we lived at last there. And I don't remember whether it was me or whether it was someone else, but someone sat in a bucket of milk one time. They were all ready for bed, had their pajamas on. I don't remember who it was anymore. Does anybody else remember that?
I think it was Lester.
Actually,
You think you remember?
might be,
Anyway, then I had to think back of how that we started this here scrapbook here. When Grandpa's had their 50th wedding anniversary, and I scrounged around today to try to find the pieces to it, and I finally found the sheets, the ones that had made any, and I couldn't believe it. I couldn't find one that I had made. And so I thought I'd get it all together, and if you want to look at it tonight, you can now. That was when they were married 50 years. And I also wrote up a little something about each one in the family, and I thought if there's any room left on the tape and you want to put it on, why, I would put it on. But I wanted to type it up and put it in the book and give it to the folks sometime. And that's all I have.
Most of you started to talk about things that happened in the Freeze farm. I was trying to think of what I could think of. Well, I wasn't born, I guess, till he moved in the other place. There's a couple things connected with that was kind of interesting. We always had, at least in the days that I was helping milk, 2 or 3 good cows. If you know the difference between really a good cow and a sort of a mixture, you could very easily spot the ones that came from the Freeze farm. And I think as I grew up, we had at least 2 or 3 of those, and they always lived for 15 or 16 years. Cows, they really were. I mean, I guess I compare them to what Phyllis's dad's cows looked like, and they were really good, full-bred stock. 2 of the things that I occasionally remember about something that's way back in time, I don't have any idea how old I was. 2 things that sort of, come back to haunt you and remember. The first thing is, I guess, my first recollection of being in bed and being aware of it or remembering what I was doing. And I guess maybe like some of the rest of you slept with my folks, which, I not in the same bed, obviously, but in the same room. And I can remember we had a small, I don't know what size, maybe a youth bed. And I thought I was too big for that bed, believe me, because I think I was going to school already. And obviously upstairs there was all my brothers and sisters, and there wasn't any room, I don't believe. So I was there for a reason. And I think I can recall that that mattress was, filled with straw, and every so often why we had to sort of rejuvenate it, get some new straw. And must have been old enough to go to school, because I can remember reading some books and so forth in that bed, so I must have been there till somebody left home, I'm not sure who. The second thing that comes back to me, and it's kind of comical, and it's just sort of a reflection on what happens. It's kind of funny how your memory, hangs on to certain things, and I can remember the last time I wet the bed, and and it was like a social event, I guess, that we had at our house. We had watermelons. And we had watermelons. So that's kind of a comical remembering, I guess, of it's hard to remember how old you were or what age you were, but I was trying to think of some of the things that we all experienced and the way of things that don't happen anymore today. Every once in a while we start talking about food with our kids, And I talk about some of the things we used to have, like tramp soup, ribble soup, and like, what's that? Well, those were kind of interesting things to remember. I also, like a lot of the rest of you, probably gained a pretty good love for pie. And as I recall, that was a pretty big thing for the weekends. And we didn't cut them in 6 pieces; we cut them in 4. And those were good memories, I think, of. Now, they were always usually reserved for Sunday. Now, if there was some reason you might have gotten a piece of pie on Saturday night, something special. Generally, they were reserved for Sunday, so that was kind of a special event. I had to try to think of some things that the rest of you didn't talk about, I guess. I was trying to think of all the things that the folks must have gotten in trouble over, some of the things they did, because they were pretty liberal. And I was trying to, and I think I can remember some of this. Of course, we were never quite, in all the conversations, but I know most of you probably remember the elders of the church coming out at least every once in a while, I would say. And we always had a tractor, and we had the thrashing machine, and I was trying to think today, we probably had one of the first kerosene refrigerators, and they probably don't even make them anymore. And all of those things were really nice to have, but they probably got them in a lot of trouble too. I can remember somebody talked about first radio. Some of the things we used to listen to, like the Amos and Andy, Phil McGee and Molly.
Yeah.
And of course, Mom was not too interested in that kind of stuff. She liked to listen to a preacher from South Bend. I forgot his name now.
Quentin Everett.
Quentin Everett, yeah.
And Howard Pascal.
And those were things that we appreciated. I think the couple of things that I appreciated about Dad, it's kind of hard to figure out where he got all this. As I recall, he used to do his own taxes, never went to anybody for advice. And I suspect that most of you get advice. And his is probably as complicated as most of yours are. I think the other thing that amazed me was the amount of reading that Dad did, and I wish I had the time and the interest to do some of that reading. I recall some of the things that he used to, and they weren't thin books; they were thick books. I guess some of them were the works of Menno Simons and some of the early church writers. That was pretty heavy reading. I suspect most of us wouldn't spend much time with those books, but I know Dad was very interested in those. And it's kind of a tribute, because I think we all have a lot more education than he does, and that he may have read more than we did. I think one of the things which I've appreciated about maybe being the youngest, I probably had the chance to go uninterrupted through 12 grades of school, and that's kind of important to me, because I didn't, a lot of your education, and even, some of it was sort of patched together. And it's kind of, at least in our family, it was kind of unique to just go right through and not stop. And I was probably the only one that was able to do that. I was always amazed how Mom used to buy groceries on $10 a week. As I recall, that's about what the eggs brought in. And I'll never know how she made that reach with everything that we ate and everything that it took to feed that many people. I remember some of the times that she sent me to town to get how many of you remember what a basket bread was? That's like a big bag of day-old bread. And as I recall, you used that maybe 8 to 10 loaves for $1. Day-old bread, and wasn't too bad. Maybe that's a little bit different way of life than what we were used to today, but it was some of the things that we did, I guess, to make, I think some of the things that I appreciate about my folks are really connected with thrift, and I have a lot of arguments with my offspring and so forth about what things are worth and how much you spend for this and how much you spend for that. And I suppose I'm a little bit like the Scrooge times. So that's a little bit of a reflection from where I came from. That's about it.
How many of you remember when we had a horse named Fannie?
Yeah.
If you remember Fannie, there was all other horses paled into insignificance. Because remember how she used to go? Dad used to hold her back. She would go so fast that you didn't have to whip her to get her to go. But I don't remember any other horses' names after that. There was never one like Fannie. How many years did we have Fannie? As far back as I can remember, until
Hardly say anymore.
it must have been. It was after the folks moved to their own farm, and I was in the 6th grade then. Boy, could she go. I remember the one time Dad and I drove to Goshen and back the same day to pay the taxes with that horse. And I don't think very many horses make the trip to go from Nappanee to Goshen anymore. Only one time that I can remember that we did that. This funeral of Katie and Eleanor is another thing that I remember. They had always lived in another state, so I barely knew who they were. In fact, I remember wondering why my dad's brothers and sisters were crying, because I didn't feel any sense of loss since I barely knew them. And I also remember one other thing very vividly. The one casket wasn't opened, and the other one that was open she had a lot of marks on her faces, and I remember thinking, well, it wouldn't take long for those to heal up in heaven. I thought, well, they wouldn't. That was. I don't remember what my thoughts were about the casket that was closed. I think we were told they were hurt too bad to open. And I remember my Uncle Martz used to drive all the way out from Goshen. This must have been before the Depression was at its worst. They had a car, and they were about the only relatives that we had that had a car. Came out all the way from Goshen. They had kids older than we were, and one every age that we had at that time. And the mother was big and fat, and she wore pink silk stockings. I just remember that. It just stands out in my mind so much. I don't know why. And she had kind of a loud voice. If any of you remember, she had kind of a loud, I don't know, well, like May. Those of you who know May, she reminds me, as I remember her anyway. And then I remember as one person that especially made an impression on me was Fern, a teacher in the 8th grade. Who had Fern Geyer? Lester had her. You were in the 1st grade, and Fannie Mae was 2nd or 3rd or whatever.
3rd.
I had her
Third.
too, I think, one year.
All of you had her, okay. I admired her so much. I thought she was so pretty and so had absolutely everything that I would have liked to have been, that I completely revolutionized my writing when I was in the 8th grade. Because I wanted to write just like she did. And I look at my papers that up until the 8th grade, I had a very scribbling and very poor handwriting. But when I was in the 8th grade, this is not my best handwriting, but I can do pretty good. I can write pretty well if I want to. And it was partly because I liked her as well. At that time, you could teach school with just 1 year of college, and it was her first year of teaching. So I was in the 8th grade. She was probably, well, not more than 5 or 6 years older than I was. So she was almost seemed like one of the girls. She was an excellent teacher, as far as I remember, considering that it was her first year of teaching. I remember about the basket bread too. I didn't remember that it lasted so long that it was still going on when Joe was at home. But one thing I remember, that we used to get rye bread with those caraway seeds, and I still get goose pimples whenever I think about caraway seeds, because I used to sit and try and pick those caraway seeds out every once in a while. I bite into one and I don't. I just hated them. Another thing that I remember, I wonder sometimes that we ever all grew up, because I remember several of the kids, I think it was the boys, were always falling into the water tank somewhere. I remember twice. Does anybody remember who it was that fell in the water tank?
I fell in the water tank twice. Yeah, one time out in the barn and one time in the milk house.
Milk house. I couldn't remember
And
who it
I
was.
can't imagine how I got out.
Well, one time Dad was right there and he pulled you out. I just remembered as
At
plain
the
as
time in
day.
the milk house, I was in that tank. It seemed like eternity. When I finally got out, I don't know how I got out.
Didn't anybody come and get you out, or were you able to stand up by yourself?
I don't know.
You don't remember?
I don't remember.
It seemed to me that somebody got you out, but I thought it was Lester. Anyhow, the tank was so high that I think what you did, you hung over the side and fell in.
Yes.
It was
But
the milk cooling.
Priest's farm?
Yeah.
Yes.
They cooled the milk.
Yeah. It must have been Eli, I think.
No. No, Eli would have been too young.
Eli.
It had to be one of the older boys.
I wasn't very old when we moved off
Yeah.
the freeze farm.
I talk about, one of the boys mentioned that Dad was so creative as a carpenter. I remember too, when I was real small, he used to take the tractor apart, and I'm sure that nobody ever told him how to take the tractor apart and put it back together again. I used to see this stuff laying all over the ground, and I wondered if he'd ever get it back together again. And there was no such thing as getting anybody to fix anything for you. You fixed everything yourself. I mean, there was no first time that I can remember that anybody ever came out to our house to fix anything was when Perry Gangers came to put a new roof on the barn. That was a real novelty. When that was after things began to pick up a little bit after the Depression, I guess. That about sums up. I just want to say a little something about each brothers and sisters. I hope you won't be offended because it's certainly not intended to. The thing I guess I remember especially about Ed is he was always teasing the little kids. Mom used to say she could hear knew as soon as Ed was in the house because everybody was screaming and yelling. I don't remember what it did that used to make him holler, but I suppose one of the things that the boys used to do was to do something they weren't supposed to and make it look like nobody knew who did it. That was and claim and act, and nobody knew anything about it. It was no use asking who did it. But I remember that he used to tease Elizabeth. He used to tell their dolls were dead, and she didn't go for that. She didn't go for that for some reason.
At least he had a dog go for
And he used to tease, once somewhere along the way, Lester had gotten a microscope, I think, for Christmas one year. And I remember looking at flies' legs in this microscope, and Edward used to say, well, he thought Lester was going to be the first Amish scientist. He thought it was going to be something big. And I don't know what else. I thought of something else that Edward and Marvin used to do. They talked about it at the Miller reunion, about going upstairs to cold beds. Edward and Marvin used to each one tried to get the other one to go up to bed first and warm up the bed. And this went on forever and ever. And never could you tell them, and each one would try to wait till the other one went. And one night, I don't know which one went to bed, and then the other one waited till I thought the bed was warm, and he went to open the stair door, and there the other one sat. He sat there freezing. Do you remember how that went? Either one of you remember that?
I don't remember it.
They were both cold and still had the bed to warm up. And Marvin, he was always the comedian in the family. I don't know why. I guess he reminded me of Uncle Wall. Uncle Wall was always laughing, and that's the way Marvin was, as far back as I could remember. When Mom would try to get him to do something that he didn't want to do, he'd act so goofy he'd make her laugh, and then some of the crazy things that I remember he used to do. I remember one time he was in grade school and they were talking about physiology, and then one of the questions was, what's the purpose of the skin? And one of Marvin said, well, to keep your insides from falling out. And another one that I remembered, and I don't know for sure if it was when the folks were on their own farm or if it was still on the priest farm. It must have been when they lived on their own farm. It was about Marvin's turn to carry in the wood. And on one side of the wood box, he carried in the wood for the cook stove, and the other side was for the heating stove. And one morning he got done with carrying in his wood real early, and he wasn't even hungry for breakfast. He went right off to school. And when we got out to look at it, here he had laid slats across the top of the wood box, and it looked like the wood box was real full. I think if Marvin's children don't know about this, we should send them word. I don't think I'll ever forget that. And when it comes to Fannie Mae, one of the things I remember about her is she used to sing a lot when she was little. Remember that little rocking chair we had? She'd sit and rock and sing. The faster she rocked, the louder she sang. And she'd make up her own songs and her own tunes. It didn't make any difference. And another thing that I remember one time, she teased so well, so of course Edward and Marvin were really good at teasing her. And it was sort of a concept. That's because we were a large family, there were a lot of things that we couldn't have because there were too many mouths to feed them. And so something was said, Fannie Mae, or something that we wanted or wished we had or something, and Fannie Mae said, well, she wished we didn't have so many children. And one of the boys said, yeah, we wish we didn't have you. I was either Edward or Marvin. I don't know who it was. And another thing, I guess I'll go on to Lester now. I remember one thing particular about Lester that Mom used to say, if she'd send Lester to do something, she never had to go and check on him because he did exactly what she told him to and did it exactly the way she asked him to do it. He was very precise and very dependable. And I think that stood him in good stead in his work today, that you have to be absolutely accurate, absolutely correct. Another thing that for some reason, I don't know why I remember this, but when we used to walk home to school, just beyond Ike Yoder's house, or that mast house, there were water ponds on both sides of the road, and when the water got real high, it would go clear across the road. So one time we were walking home from school, there was deep water on the road, about this deep, And Fannie Mae and I walked around the edge, and Edward and Marvin wouldn't listen to me. They walked right through the water, or the water went right up over their boots, and Lester wanted to go too, and I wouldn't let him. He bawled all the way around this puddle, all around the And for some reason, I don't know why I remember that.
I think I fell in through the ice there one time, too.
Could be. I wouldn't be surprised at that. And about Elizabeth, I don't have too many memories about Elizabeth. One thing I remember that she carried a tune at such an early age. She sang a lot, and she carried a tune at such an early age. Another thing I remember about her, she was always knoaching her cats. You don't know what to know,
Stray cat along the road, too. Come home with boxes full of cats.
Put clothes on them.
Then I had one thing that I especially remember about Eli was that he was always bidding $100,000. I'll bet you $100,000. I don't know what about, but I just remember so well. Then when it comes to Joe, I wasn't home much. I was about 16 when I left home, and I was 15 when Joe was born. So I don't have too many memories of what happened when Joe was home. But one thing I do remember is when he sat on Mom's lap longer than any of the other kids did. He didn't, his feet almost reached on the floor, and the boy teased him, and he didn't care. He sat on her lap as long as she could. And another thing I remember one time when she was trying to get him to take a nap, but she wanted to hold him and rock him, and he said, "Du willst mich nicht schlafen machen." You're just trying to make me go to sleep. And Mom said, "No, you don't have to go to sleep. You just rest. I just want to hold you." But she knew that pretty soon he'd go to sleep. Another thing that he did when he was a little fella, I don't know how old, he couldn't talk without going like this. And we teased him so much about it. Does he still do that?
He did it tonight when he was talking.
Well, I tried to watch and I couldn't see it tonight, but we teased him so much about that. He couldn't say a word, but up came the sentence. And we teased him so much, I thought maybe he'd finally quit it. I guess that's all. Got something else here that I can't read. Oh, I remember another thing about him. That when he had his first pair of patched pants, he thought that was wonderful. When he was little, he outgrew his pants before he wore them out. When he got to a certain age, finally he had to have new patches on his knees. Then he looked like all the other boys, and that was great stuff. I remember real well when he was born. I remember if he'd have been a girl, then it would have been 4 boys and 4 girls. But instead of that, he was a boy, so we were forever 5 boys and 3 girls, where girls were outnumbered. Sometimes 5 boys seemed like an awful lot of boys, I'll tell you.
I've said a number of times to my wife that how I remember how that I can smell things pretty good, and I could when we lived on the farm that I could come in from the house and I wouldn't have to come clear to the house, and I could smell almost what we're going to have for supper, and I could, especially cornbread. I could smell that a mile away. As I remember, that was a highlight. I mean, we had cornbread maybe once or at least once a week we had cornbread. Then, of course, the next morning we had the pumpernickel, too, with put milk on it. I remember that. And, of course, another thing I keep talking about, of course, Mother, she just remembers it by memory, is vanilla tart pie.
I knew that was coming up.
I remember that vanilla tart pie. And one of these times I'm just going to sit down there when she makes a pie, and I'm going to tell her exactly how to make it. And she makes it the way I tell her, the way I remember Mom making. Because I remember seeing her making it on Saturday dozens of times. I remember exactly how she did it. And so if she'd do it the way I tell her to do it, I think it'd turn out just like that. And I guess one of the other things that I remember too was that when I got my own horse and buggy, and we got a little black, I don't know, what was she, a little mare?
Yeah.
Oh, I tell you,
She was a Spitfire, wasn't she?
she was a Spitfire. That was, she was fine as long as she could go down the road and nothing spectacular happened, not a spectacular noise or a big truck or a train or something. It was fine, and boy, could she go! Oh boy, I thought I was pretty proud of her because I almost got in a race a couple of times with her. Well, anyway, some of the other fellows with the horse and buggy, But I remember twice that she almost got away. She almost wrecked the buggy. One time it was west on 6 by where John Miller's lived there. It was when there was a train went by, and she flipped around and went into the fence, and we did hold her. When she didn't get away, but we almost wrecked the buggy. And I don't remember where the other place was that another time this happened, and I guess we got rid of her then. But sure, she could go.
I remember when I was a little girl, I used to think that the epitome of luxury would be to have a pony, and I don't know why. Some of our neighbors had a pony, and guess who had got the pony? And the cart yet besides. Never got a pony.
Lester used to ride it and his feet almost reached the ground.
I was just thinking how interestingly Mother used to put things together, like baking the pies, baking bread on Saturday afternoon or whatever. Always enough pies to last all weekend. And while she had that stove all fired up, you know what we were doing?
Taking baths.
Taking baths right in front of that
Yes.
in a tin tub.
Right.
All used the same water. Probably were wiped with the same towel.
Another thing I remember about Eli, that he used to, when he'd come in from the field or outside, he'd be all dirty and he'd wash his hands and face, and he'd say, "Am I clean now?" And he'd always use the water very sparingly, and then if you'd say no, he'd say, "Yes, I am, yes, I am." He'd get mad if you'd tell him that he wasn't clean.
And I guess I remember when I went to, especially when I went to Elkhart to get a job. I think I remembered this, but I guess this when I had this accident with my hand, and then when I went to Elkhart to got a different kind of a job, a more responsible job. I had more responsibilities to this particular job that I had when I started working for the cleaners over there, and of course had equipment to look after, and I got a bonus each year that I worked there. Because if I didn't have any accidents with the truck, and if I took care of the truck and everything, and I remember several years I had a couple little dents, and he deducted whatever it was from this dents. I forget how much I got. Anyway, he deducted this, what it cost to get the dents fixed in the truck that I got in them, and the rest of the money I got. But I think I remember that from when we used to use Dad's stuff in the shop, and Dad come in there and want to use something, We'd never put it back, because Dad had a place for everything and everything for its place. That's the way Dad kept stuff, And so when we went away to work, he said, I remember hearing him saying it a number of times. He said, "I hope when you go away to work for somebody else that you don't use their tools like you use mine. Take care of them, And I think that that's kind of stuck with me. I think.
Do you remember the first time you and I earned some money by driving the horses for Amos Reed? You came home and you had a nice big shiny $50, and we were proud as punch. Probably worked all day for that. I don't remember for sure.
I worked all week
driving those mules.
I remember helping them make hay, and I think I helped them all week, and I got $1.50. And then we went to town on Saturday night. That went quite a ways. A couple of maybe a Sunday and a pack of gum or something.
I remember one time we bought Long Johns. Remember that? Man, that was good.
I remember another thing. I remember another thing that we bought, that I bought at one time, because I liked them so well. That was marshmallows. And I got sick, and I couldn't eat them for months afterwards. I ate almost a whole big pack. just far from done.
Mary, do you remember one time when the teacher you go to school and the teacher quit? What was it? For her first year, I believe, and and some of the bigger boys were so mean, she just couldn't keep school. Then, Mrs. Calendar taught school, and you come home the evening, the first day, and she said, "We sung this morning." Miss Calendar would always sing. Now, I and Mom both went to school to her. And she's still living. I met her, just this summer.
She's at Green
100 years old.
Yeah.
How old is she?
Yeah, she's, I guess,
way up in the
90
90s.
years old.
How are we doing for time? Are we out?
We got another 5, 6 minutes.
Another thing, I don't know how I missed this. One of my most outstanding memories was when I was in first grade. My teacher died. I found out recently when I got together with my grade school friends that he was a known epileptic, but I didn't know it at the time. About a week before school was out, he died in a seizure in the middle of the night. And then we had Pearl Calendar for the rest. It was about another week and a half of school. And the other thing was that when I was either in the, I don't know what grade I was in, Edward and Marvin might remember because it was when Mr. Bach was our teacher, that Merle Hepler died. That was one of the students that died. Do you remember going to that funeral? The whole school went to the funeral. You don't remember, Marvin? Well, it might have been that just Edward and I went to see it because it was one of the years. Both of you had Mr. Bach for a teacher in the first grade, didn't you? Right? The whole school went to the funeral. I can even remember one of the songs they sang. I'll tell you, if you never have an experience like that, you missed something because we used to go past. He's buried in that Hepton Cemetery, and we used to go past that cemetery when we'd go to Grandpa Miller's, and I used to just dread going, but I used to just try and look the other way. But of course, I knew after a while I'd look over there anyway because I couldn't resist looking because that's where the. Do you know that Mr. Bach is still living? He lives in Middlebury. You look in the telephone book. I thought sure the first time that Edward and Marvin and I ever get together at Marvin's that we're going to go see Mr. Bach, and I forgot all about it last New Year's Day.
Edward Bach died. Here in Nappanee. Didn't he? Did Edward Bach die here in Nappanee?
I think that was a different Bach, though.
Edward Bach, you look in the telephone book. He lives on South Main in Middlebury. He used to have a fruit farm where that new high school is for years and years.
I knew he had that, but I didn't know what became of it.
Well, I don't know. He gives an address for
Can
Edward Bach.
Can you recall our going to a funeral at the Union Center Church for somebody?
I don't think that was. It must have been after I went.
I think
to school.
I think you're probably thinking the same thing I did.
Who was that?
I haven't the slightest idea, but I think that was the first funeral that I went to that was not an Amish funeral.
Well, whose funeral was that?
Okay,
I have no
I'm
idea.
trying to think too what funeral we went to down there. That after the funeral, during the viewing, someone collapsed and died too there at the funeral. At that funeral. That's what I remember about a funeral there at the main center.
There was a young fellow that was about 3 or 4 years ahead of me in school that got killed in some sledding accident. Somebody said something about Christy Schmucker's, one of his younger brothers was with him at the time.
Was it a Blosser? Blosser boy?
Could have been, yeah.
That's the funeral you went to.
I'll bet
you.
That was the funeral. That was at Union Center, or
That was after I was out of school, so I don't remember. But I remember going to.
That might have been it.
Who remembers going to Grandpa Miller's?
Yeah.
I always enjoyed going down there because the first thing we'd head for is the old trash pit.
Oh, you mean the junkyard? Or
Yeah, it was a junkyard. It was a city dump.
Yeah,
Close to
city
Grandpa
dump.
Miller.
Yeah.
I remember the flowing well that there was. Wasn't there a flowing well close to that?
Yeah.
Or was that?
On Marsh.
Marsh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I remember us too going down there and stomping around in that trash pile, but I remember more vividly all the nice stuff that they had there that they got from the trash pit, and I never could find any of that.
I put the wrong one already.
Wasn't Elizabeth going to say something yet? Something
Well, it'll take
One of the privileges I guess I had as the youngest one, I did some things that some of the rest of you didn't do, and I can remember the folks went to Hanover, Missouri. I don't know how often they traveled, not very often, I don't think. We went on the train, and I had never seen anybody that wasn't of the fair skin or whatever. And I remember, I can still remember this. I must not have been more than maybe 6 or 7.
Well, you were
My
younger
first-
than that, I'm sure.
Huh?
You were about 3 or 4, probably.
Oh, all right. My first look at a colored person, and I can still remember those white eyes, and I think it was a man, and there may have been a lady sitting across the aisle.